In the Rocky Mountains, a mother and her 2-year-old son disappeared during a hike. For 6 years, authorities assumed they'd fallen or gotten lost, but no trace was ever found. Then, a research team studying geothermal activity made a horrifying discovery. Mark Brennan, the father, was still haunted by their disappearance. The day they vanished, he was home with food poisoning. His wife, Sarah, had insisted he stay behind while she and their son, Ethan, went on the hike alone. The numbers on his quarterly reports blurred, a reminder of the 6 years of dead ends and unanswered questions. When the phone rang, a strange Colorado number, his stomach clenched. "Mr. Brennan, this is Detective Patricia Chun with the Park County Sheriff's Office. I need to speak with you about your wife and son's case." The words hit him like a physical blow. Hope, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, surged through him. He fumbled for words. "What did you find?" "Mr. Brennan, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to Colorado? We've made a discovery that requires your immediate attention." Mark's hands trembled as he booked a flight. "Which hot spring?" he asked. "There are dozens in that area." "Morning Glory Pool, about 2 miles off the main trail," the detective replied. "A research team from the University of Colorado found it while taking core samples. Their equipment registered anomalies at the bottom of the spring." Mark's mind reeled. He and Sarah had visited that pool before. He remembered her talking about the water's 160 degrees Fahrenheit temperature and how the high mineral content would prevent anything from fully decomposing. He also remembered Ethan calling it bubble water, his excitement for the prismatic colors. "What exactly did they find?" he asked, his voice strained. "Fabric remnants consistent with hiking gear, a backpack frame, some leather from boots, and organic material," Chin said, her professional tone unable to mask the gravity of her words. "We'll need DNA confirmation, but given the location and the items found." "What about my son?" "Ethan was only 2, Mark interrupted. "Did you find anything that would indicate?" "That's what we need to discuss in person, Mr. Brennan. The forensics team is still processing the scene. The nature of hot springs makes recovery complicated." After the call, Mark moved in a daze, packing a bag for Denver. As he passed the photo gallery Sarah had created, he saw a picture of them at Morning Glory Pool the summer before they disappeared. Ethan was in Sarah's arms, pointing excitedly at the colors. He had to look away. He knew what he had to do: book the flight, call his boss, and try to prepare himself for what lay ahead. The flight to Denver was a blur. The mountains that had once held such majesty for Sarah now felt oppressive. As they drove toward the site, Detective Chin explained that the research team had found the items 3 days ago. "We needed to verify certain details before contacting you," she said. "Have you found any indication of my son?" Mark asked. Chen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The recovery is ongoing. The spring is deeper than originally mapped, nearly 40 feet at the center. The water temperature and mineral content mean we can only send divers down for very short periods." The parking area for the Cascade Trail was cordoned off with yellow tape. The 2-mile hike to Morning Glory Pool felt endless. When they arrived, the beautiful spring was surrounded by investigation equipment. A specialized diving platform had been constructed over one edge, and recovery teams worked methodically around the perimeter. Dr. Emily Reeves, the environmental scientist who made the discovery, approached. "We were taking core samples of the bacterial mats when our magnetometer detected metal at depth," she explained, leading them to an evidence tent. Inside, Mark saw the corroded backpack frame, purple fabric still clinging to it. "We believe the pack's metal frame is what triggered our instruments," Dr. Reeves said. "The depth and position suggest it had been weighted down." "Weighted down? You mean this wasn't an accident?" Mark asked, his mind reeling. "That's one of the things we need to determine," Detective Chin replied. She showed him more items: Sarah's hiking boots with her custom orthotic insoles, her car keys, and her wedding ring. Mark picked up the bag containing the ring. The titanium had survived perfectly, the inscription still readable: "To the summit and back M and S." "The position of items suggests your wife entered the spring fully clothed with all her gear," Chin said. "That's highly unusual for an accidental fall. Most victims who accidentally enter hot springs do so partially." "Sarah knew these springs," Mark said, his voice hollow. "She was obsessive about safety, especially with Ethan. She would never have gotten close enough to fall." "That's what we need to investigate," Chin replied. "There's something else. The research team's survey shows this spring has an unusual depth profile. Most hot springs in this area are relatively shallow, but Morning Glory has a narrow chimney that extends down much deeper than the surface pool suggests. Mark understood the unspoken implication. Different remains could be at different levels. He forced himself to look at each item, trying to make sense of the tragedy. But where was evidence of Ethan? There were no tiny boots, no straps from the child carrier, no sippy cup. The absence was deafening. Just then, a shout came from the diving platform. Chen excused herself and returned moments later, her expression unreadable. The dive team has located additional items at depth. We should get you to the hotel now. This is going to be a lengthy process. Did they find anything related to my son? Mark asked. Chen hesitated. Not definitively, but the absence of certain evidence is significant. If both your wife and son had entered the spring, we would expect to find items from both. The fact that we're only finding adult-related items suggests perhaps your son wasn't with your wife when she entered the water. Mark felt a spark of hope ignite within him. If Ethan wasn't in the spring, if there was a chance. We're reopening this as a potential criminal investigation, Chen continued. We'll be interviewing everyone connected to this area. It's a long shot after so much time, but if your son was separated from your wife before she died, someone might have seen something. As they walked back to the car, Mark took one last look at Morning Glory Pool. Its deceptive beauty had hidden his wife's fate for 6 years, but it hadn't claimed his son. The next morning, a command center was set up at the Cascade Trail parking area. Mark arrived to find dozens of search and rescue personnel poring over topographical maps. Detective Chun handed him a fluorescent vest marked Family. We're organizing grid searches based on possible routes your wife might have taken, she explained. Since we're now looking at this as a potential crime scene, we're also checking all structures within a 5-mile radius. Mark remembered Sarah mentioning the emergency shelter cabins during their hikes. They were basic structures with firewood, first aid supplies, and logbooks where hikers recorded their stays. A park ranger named Tom Mitchell approached, his weathered face showing decades of outdoor experience. I'm Ranger Tom Mitchell, he said. I've pulled the maintenance logs for all shelter cabins in this sector from 6 years ago. Mitchell explained that he had been on duty on the day Sarah and Ethan disappeared. I was doing routine maintenance on the backcountry shelters. It was logged in the park records, but I guess no one thought to cross-reference my maintenance schedule with the missing persons case back then. Mark's pulse quickened. Sarah would have sought shelter from even moderate rain with a toddler. Were the logbooks checked after my family disappeared? That's actually unclear from the original case files, Chen admitted. The initial search focused on the main trails and the assumption of an accident. I have them, Mitchell said quietly. All the old logbooks. Park Service wanted to throw them out, but I kept them. They're in storage at the ranger station. Chen immediately assigned an officer to retrieve the logbooks while organizing search teams. Mark was assigned to Mitchell's group, heading for the shelter cabins to conduct a thorough search. As they hiked, Mitchell maintained a steady pace. Your wife knew these trails well, he said. She'd have known exactly where each shelter was located. She had them all marked on her maps, Mark confirmed. Said it was important to always have a backup plan with a toddler. The Timber Creek shelter appeared through the trees. Mitchell opened the heavy door, revealing a sparse interior with wooden bunks, a small stove, and emergency supplies. Mark stood in the doorway, imagining Sarah and Ethan waiting out a rainstorm, turning it into an adventure for their son. The CSI team began to dust for prints and check for trace evidence. The thing about these shelters, Mitchell said, is that they're supposed to be left unlocked for emergencies, but sometimes hikers accidentally lock them when leaving or the mechanism jams. I specifically remember checking all the locks that day because of the weather coming in. They moved on to Pine Ridge Shelter, a similar structure, but with a better view of the valley. Again, the CSI team began their meticulous documentation while Mark tried to put himself in Sarah's shoes. Which route would she have taken with a tired toddler if a storm threatened? Mr. Brennan, Mitchell said, consulting his notebook again. Did your wife usually vary her routes or stick to familiar trails? She liked to explore, but was careful with Ethan. She'd scout new trails alone first, then bring him if they were suitable. Mark paused, remembering that day she mentioned wanting to show him the alpine meadow. It's past Morning Glory Pool on the upper loop. Mitchell's expression grew thoughtful. The upper loop, that would put her near Pine Ridge or Avalanche Creek shelters if bad weather moved in. Not Timber Creek. That's the opposite direction. As they hiked toward Avalanche Creek shelter, the last and most remote of the three, Mark noticed Mitchell occasionally pausing to examine the trail. Even after 6 years, the man clearly knew every root and rock, every seasonal variation. Must be strange, Mark said. Having such a tragedy happen in a place you know so well. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Every ranger deals with it eventually. Lost hikers, accidents, sometimes worse. But a mother and child just vanishing. That haunts you. I think about it every time I pass Morning Glory Pool. Such a beautiful place to hide something so terrible. The Avalanche Creek shelter sat in a small clearing, more isolated than the others. As Mitchell unlocked the door, Mark noticed this one had a newer lock. Had to replace this one 4 years ago, Mitchell explained. The old one kept jamming. The CSI team began their work, but something felt different about this shelter. Maybe it was the location, the way the forest pressed close, or how the sound of the creek masked other noises. Mark could imagine someone feeling very alone here, very vulnerable. If my wife came here with Ethan, Mark said slowly, and someone else was already here or arrived after. These shelters sleep 6 to 8 people, Mitchell said. It's not uncommon for strangers to share during storms. Most hikers are good people. But he didn't finish the thought. As the search team spread out from the shelter, checking the surrounding forest, Mark stood by the creek that gave the shelter its name. The water rushed by, cold from snowmelt, indifferent to human tragedy. Somewhere in these mountains, his son had been separated from his wife. Someone had seen something, done something, known something. The question was whether 6 years had buried those secrets as deeply as the hot spring had hidden Sarah's fate. The search teams had been working for 3 hours when Detective Chen's radio crackled with urgent news. Mark was helping document the area around Avalanche Creek Shelter when he heard Chen's sharp intake of breath. They found something at the ranger station, she told the group. We need to head back immediately. The hike back felt endless. Chen set a punishing pace that left Mark struggling to keep up. Mitchell stayed with him, occasionally offering a steadying hand on the rougher sections of trail. What do you think they found? Mark asked between labored breaths. Could be anything, Mitchell replied, though his expression had grown serious. The station has employee areas that haven't been thoroughly searched before. If someone on staff was involved, they emerged from the trail to find the ranger station parking lot transformed into a crime scene. Additional police vehicles had arrived, and officers were establishing a perimeter around the building. Through the windows, Mark could see investigators moving through the interior. Detective Chun met them at the entrance. We got a warrant to search employee lockers and common areas. We started with current staff, then moved to the older unassigned lockers from former employees. She led them inside past the public area with its trail maps and educational displays, into the employee section Mark had never seen. A row of metal lockers lined one wall, several standing open with evidence markers placed nearby. Locker 47 hasn't been assigned in 4 years, Chin explained, stopping in front of a green metal door standing ajar. The current station manager said it belonged to Jake Morrison, a seasonal worker who left abruptly in 2019. We had to cut the lock. Mark looked inside and felt his legs weaken. Evidence bags on a nearby table contained a delicate silver necklace with a small compass charm. Sarah's anniversary gift from him, which she wore on every hike. Next to it, another wedding ring. This one, the white gold band with small diamonds she wore when not hiking, usually kept in her pack as a backup. These are Sarah's, he said, his voice barely audible. The necklace. I gave it to her for our 5th anniversary. She said a compass would always help her find her way home. Chin nodded grimly. The items were hidden behind a false panel in the back of the locker. Someone went to significant effort to conceal them. Jake Morrison, Mark repeated the name. Who is he? Mitchell had moved closer to examine the evidence without touching it. I remember Jake. Young guy, maybe mid-20s when he worked here. Quiet, kept to himself. Good with trail maintenance, but not great with people. What did he look like? Mark demanded, trying to picture the man who might have killed his wife. Brown hair, average height, a bit of a loner, Mitchell recalled. He lived in employee housing for 2 seasons, then left without much notice. Said he got a job offer in Utah, but none of us heard from him again. Chin was already pulling up records on her tablet. Jake Andrew Morrison, DOB April 3, 1994. Worked here summers 2018 and 2019. No criminal record, but... She paused, scrolling through data. He's been off-grid since leaving here. No current address, no employment records, no credit activity. He's hiding, Mark said, staring at his wife's jewelry. He killed her, and he's been hiding for 6 years. We're putting out a bolo alert now, Chin assured him. Every agency in the country will be looking for him. Mr. Brennan, I need you to confirm these items. You're certain they belong to your wife. Mark reached for the compass necklace, then stopped, remembering not to contaminate evidence. The compass has an engraving on the back, our initials, and the date. He swallowed hard. Sarah never hiked without it, said it was her good luck charm. Chin carefully turned the evidence bag to reveal the inscription. There it was, exactly as Mark remembered. MNS, always find your way home. 2015. If Jake Morrison took these as trophies. Chin didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood the implication. But why leave them here? Mark asked. Why not take them when he fled? Mitchell spoke up thoughtfully. The lockers are rarely checked. Management only clears them out every few years when they need space. He probably thought they'd be safe here indefinitely. Maybe planned to come back for them someday. As crime scene technicians processed the locker and surrounding area, Mark found himself studying the employee break room visible through a doorway. Such an ordinary space. A coffee maker, a refrigerator covered in safety notices, a table with mismatched chairs. Had Jake Morrison sat there planning his crime? Had he returned from killing Sarah and calmly eaten lunch with colleagues? Mr. Mitchell, Chin addressed the ranger. We'll need a full statement about everything you remember about Morrison. Any interactions with the family? Any concerning behavior? Of course, Mitchell agreed readily. Though I'll be honest, he was so quiet it's hard to remember much. Showed up, did his work, went home. The kind of employee you barely notice. Something about that bothered Mark, though he couldn't quite place why. A park employee who worked these trails, who knew all the hidden spots and shelters, who could move through the wilderness without drawing attention. It was the perfect profile for someone who could make a mother and child disappear. We need to search employee housing, Mark said suddenly. Even if it's been years, there might be some trace. Already on it, Chin assured him. We've got teams heading to the old seasonal quarters now. If Morrison left anything behind, we'll find it. Mitchell excused himself to return to his maintenance duties, promising to compile a full list of anything he could remember about Morrison. As he left, Mark noticed the ranger's slight limp, probably from years of hiking these rough trails. The man had been nothing but helpful, even staying late into his shift to assist with the search. Outside, Mark stood in the parking lot trying to process this development. They had a name, a face to put to his nightmare. Jake Morrison, young, quiet, forgettable Jake Morrison, had somehow encountered Sarah and Ethan on the trail. He'd done something to separate them, killed Sarah, hidden her body in the hot spring, and kept her jewelry as trophies. But where was Ethan? If Morrison took my son, Mark said to Chin, who had followed him outside, where would he go? How do you hide a 2-year-old for 6 years? That's what we're going to find out, Chin replied firmly. The fact that he kept trophies suggests a certain psychology. He wanted reminders, if he took Ethan. She didn't finish, but Mark understood. If Morrison had kept Sarah's jewelry, there was a chance, however slim, that he'd kept Ethan too. Somewhere, Jake Morrison might be raising Mark's son as his own. The compass necklace flashed in Mark's mind. Sarah's good luck charm, meant to always guide her home. Instead, it had been locked away in darkness for years, a killer's trophy. But now it might be the key to finding their son. I want to see everything about Morrison, Mark said. Employment records, background check, any photos you can find. If this man has my son, I need to know everything about him. Chin nodded. We're pulling it all together now. Why don't you get some rest at the hotel? This is going to be a long investigation. But Mark knew rest was impossible. Not when they finally had a lead, finally had a name. Jake Morrison had made one mistake, keeping those trophies where they could eventually be found. Now Mark just had to hope the man had made others, enough to lead them to Ethan before another 6 years passed. Mark's house felt emptier than ever as he walked through the door at 9 p.m., exhausted from the flight back to Denver. Detective Chun had insisted he return home while they pursued leads on Jake Morrison, promising to call the moment they had any developments. The familiar surroundings only emphasized the absence of Sarah's voice calling from the kitchen and Ethan's toys scattered across the living room floor. He dropped his bag by the door and moved to his home office, powering up his laptop. If he couldn't be in Colorado actively searching, at least he could research. Jake Morrison's name yielded frustratingly little online. No social media profiles, no recent addresses, just a few employment verification records that dead-ended in 2019. Mark's phone buzzed with a text from Chin. Teams checking Morrison's last known contacts in Utah. We'll update in AM. He set the phone aside and pulled out his notebook from the trip, reviewing everything they'd learned. Sarah's jewelry in Morrison's locker, the young man's sudden departure, the way he'd apparently vanished without a trace, taking possibly Ethan with him. But something nagged at Mark as he reviewed his notes from the shelter searches. He'd written down Mitchell's comment about the Avalanche Creek shelter lock being replaced 4 years ago because it kept jamming. That would have been 2020, after Morrison had already left. Yet Mitchell had known the exact year without checking any records. Mark shook his head. He was overthinking things, seeing suspicious details where none existed. Mitchell managed maintenance for all the shelters. Of course, he'd remember when locks were replaced. Still, other small details surfaced as he reviewed the day. The way Mitchell had stayed close during the entire search, always within earshot of police communications, how he'd volunteered immediately to help, inserting himself into the investigation. His detailed memory of Morrison, despite claiming the man was forgettable. And there was something else, something Mitchell had said at the shelter that bothered Mark. What was it? He closed his eyes, trying to recall the exact words. I think about it every time I pass Morning Glory Pool. Such a beautiful place to hide something so terrible. Hide something terrible. Not for something terrible to happen, or where something terrible occurred. Hide as if it were deliberate, planned. Mark picked up his phone and scrolled to Detective Chen's number. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the call button. What was he going to say? That the helpful ranger who'd spent his entire day assisting them had used a slightly odd turn of phrase? But the unease wouldn't leave him. He placed the call. Chen here. Detective, it's Mark Brennan. I know this might sound paranoid, but I've been thinking about Ranger Mitchell. What about him? Just small things. The way he phrased certain comments, how he knew specific details without checking records. He's been incredibly helpful, maybe too helpful. Chen was quiet for a moment. It's not unusual for local officials to insert themselves into investigations, especially in small communities, but I'll make a note to look into his background more thoroughly. Did he do or say anything specifically concerning? No, nothing concrete. I'm probably just grasping at straws because we're focused on Morrison. Grief and stress can make us see patterns that aren't there, Chen said gently. But I've learned to trust family members' instincts. I'll have someone quietly verify Mitchell's whereabouts on July 15th 6 years ago, just to be thorough. After ending the call, Mark felt both foolish and relieved. He was probably manufacturing suspicion where none belonged, but at least Chen would check. He moved to the kitchen to make coffee, knowing sleep would be elusive despite his exhaustion. His laptop dinged with an email notification. The sender was T. Mitchell. Subject line, information about Jake Morrison. Mark's pulse quickened. How did Mitchell have his email address? Then he remembered they'd exchanged contact information during the search in case anyone remembered additional details. The email was brief. Mr. Brennan, I've been going through old employee files and found some concerning items about Morrison. I think Detective Chen should see them immediately. I'm back in Denver tonight for a meeting tomorrow. Could I stop by briefly? I have work logs that show Morrison's assignments the week your family disappeared. Tom Mitchell. Mark stared at the screen. Mitchell was offering to bring evidence about Morrison directly to his house at night. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. But what if the ranger really had found something important? What if this was the break they needed to find Ethan? He could call Chen back, ask her to be present. But that seemed overly paranoid for someone who'd been nothing but helpful. Mitchell was law enforcement himself, a respected ranger with 15 years of service. Mark was letting exhaustion and desperation cloud his judgment. He typed back, I'll be up. Coffee's on if you want some. A while later, headlights swept across his living room windows. Mark watched through the blinds as Mitchell's Park Service truck pulled into his driveway. The ranger emerged carrying a manila folder and what looked like a small evidence box. Mark opened the door before Mitchell could knock. Thanks for making the drive. Come in. Mitchell entered with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in any situation. I hope I'm not intruding. I know it's late, but I thought you'd want to see this immediately. Can I get you that coffee? Mark offered, leading him to the kitchen. That would be great. It's been a long day. Mitchell set his materials on the kitchen table and took a seat, looking around with interest. Nice place. Very homey. Mark poured 2 mugs, his back to Mitchell as he added sugar to his own. Behind him, he heard papers rustling as the ranger opened his folder. So, I cross-referenced Morrison's work assignments with the trail logs from that week. Mitchell began. He was scheduled for maintenance on the Upper Loop Trail the day your family disappeared. That would put him in direct proximity to Morning Glory Pool. Mark turned with the coffee mugs, noticing Mitchell had spread several official-looking documents across the table. Work schedules, assignment logs, timesheets. It all looked legitimate, damning evidence against Morrison. "This is incredible," Mark said, setting Mitchell's mug in front of him and taking a seat with his own. "How did Morrison's assignments not come up in the original investigation?" "Bureaucratic oversight," Mitchell said, taking a sip of coffee. "Different departments, different filing systems, things fall through the cracks." He pulled out another paper. "But here's the really interesting part. Morrison requested that specific assignment, traded shifts with another worker, to be on that trail that day." Mark leaned forward to examine the document, his coffee mug warm between his hands. The information was compelling, painting a picture of Morrison as a predator who'd planned his crime. He took a long drink of coffee, feeling the caffeine hit his exhausted system. "We need to get this to Detective Chin immediately," Mark said, reaching for his phone. But his hand felt strangely heavy, his movements sluggish. The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. Mitchell continued talking, his voice steady and calm. "You know, the thing about Morrison is he was always too obvious, too convenient. The quiet loner, the sudden departure. Real life isn't usually that neat." Mark tried to focus on Mitchell's face, but his vision was blurring. The coffee mug slipped from his numb fingers, the brown liquid spreading across the documents. "What did you?" "I'm truly sorry about this, Mark." Mitchell's voice sounded distant despite being right across the table. "You just had to mention your concerns to the detective, didn't you? I saw her making notes about checking my background. Couldn't have that." The room spun violently. Mark attempted to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. He slumped sideways, barely aware of Mitchell rising from his chair, moving around the table with unhurried purpose. "Don't fight it," Mitchell said gently, catching Mark before he hit the floor. "It's just a sedative. We have a drive ahead of us, and I need you compliant. You're going to see your son again, Mark. Isn't that what you wanted?" "Ethan." Through the fog of whatever Mitchell had given him, that name broke through. His son was alive. Mitchell knew where he was. Mark tried to speak, to demand answers, but his mouth wouldn't form words. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Mitchell's weathered face looking down at him with something almost like regret. Consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Mark's head throbbed, his mouth felt lined with cotton, and for several disorienting moments, he couldn't remember where he was. The surface beneath him was hard, cold, a wooden floor, not his bed. His wrists were bound behind his back with what felt like zip ties, and his ankles were similarly restrained. Memory crashed back. Mitchell in his kitchen, the drugged coffee, the terrifying promise about seeing Ethan. Mark forced his eyes open, blinking against the dim light filtering through dirty windows that he woke up in a cabin, but it wasn't one of the park's standard shelters. This was older, more remote. The walls were rough-hewn logs with concrete filling the gaps. A wood stove sat cold in the corner, and the single room smelled of must and something else, a scent of prolonged, unwashed human habitation that made his stomach turn. "Ah, you're awake." Mitchell's voice came from the door. The ranger was sitting in a wooden chair, still in his uniform, looking as calm as if they were just sharing coffee. The sedative was carefully measured. "You've been out for about 3 hours." Mark's voice came out raspy. "Where are we?" "My grandfather's old hunting cabin, about 15 miles from any trail," Mitchell replied. "Completely off the grid. I've been meaning to sell it for years, but it's proven useful." Mitchell stood and moved to check Mark's restraints with practiced efficiency. "Can't have you getting loose." "Not yet. You killed Sarah." It wasn't a question. Mitchell's face tightened. "That wasn't supposed to happen." "None of it was." He moved to the window, staring out at the dark forest. "My wife, Rebecca, and I had been trying for children for 5 years. 3 miscarriages. The last one, just a month before that July, nearly killed her. Then came the depression. She attempted suicide twice." Mark tested his bonds, finding no give. "So you stole mine?" Mitchell turned back, his expression almost pleading for understanding. "I didn't plan it. That morning, I was checking the shelters like I told you. The weather turned. An unexpected storm cell. I was at Avalanche Creek Shelter when your wife and Ethan came running in. She was scared, the lightning was close. She asked if they could wait it out with me. The ranger started pacing, lost in the memory. Ethan was perfect. 2 years old, with those blonde curls, calling me Mr. Ranger in that sweet voice. He played with my radio, pretended to call for backup. Sarah was laughing, said he loved anything with buttons. So trusting, both of them. "You sick bastard," Mark growled. I wasn't going to hurt anyone, Mitchell's voice rose. But then Sarah mentioned you were homesick and that no one knew exactly where they were hiking. The storm got worse, and she decided to stay the night rather than risk hiking with Ethan. There was no cell signal to let you know. Mark's heart pounded as he pieced together his wife's final hours, seeking safety in the storm, trusting the park ranger, making the sensible choice to protect their son. I called Rebecca on the satellite phone, Mitchell continued. Told her about this beautiful little boy who needed a home, whose mother wasn't taking care of him properly, letting him hike in dangerous weather. Rebecca was so excited. For the first time in months, she sounded alive again. Sarah was an excellent mother, Mark spat. Maybe, but in that moment, all I could think about was giving Rebecca hope. Mitchell's hands clenched and unclenched. After Ethan fell asleep, I tried to convince Sarah to let us adopt him. Told her about our struggles, our losses. She was sympathetic, but of course she said no. That's when he trailed off, but Mark could fill in the blanks. In that remote shelter, with no witnesses except a sleeping toddler, Mitchell had made his choice. I used a sleeper hold. She didn't suffer. Mitchell's voice went flat. Then I had to figure out what to do. I wrapped her body in a tarp from the shelter supplies, put rocks in with her, and carried her to Morning Glory Pool before dawn. The hot springs would destroy any evidence, I thought. I took her jewelry as proof she was gone, planning to plant it on someone eventually. Morrison, Mark said. Poor Jake. The perfect fall guy. Mitchell actually smiled. I kept those items for years, waiting for the right moment. When they found Sarah's remains, I knew it was time to deflect suspicion. Where's my son? Mark demanded. Mitchell checked his watch. Rebecca will be bringing him soon. And the supplies we'll need to deal with you. She's known the truth from the beginning. Help me create the adoption story, dye his hair, and keep him hidden those first months. She's been a wonderful mother to him these 6 years. His name is Ethan, Mark said. Owen. We call him Owen. The ranger's voice softened. He's happy, Mark. A good student. Loves soccer. Wants to be a park ranger like his dad. He doesn't remember you or Sarah. As far as he knows, Rebecca and I are his whole world. The sound of an approaching vehicle made Mitchell move to the window. Headlights swept across the trees. Right on time. Now, you're going to stay calm and quiet. Rebecca's bringing the supplies, tarp, lye, shovels. Owen's in the car. We told him we're checking on the old cabin, maybe staying the night. Any sound from you, and we'll have to traumatize the boy by letting him see things no child should. Mark heard car doors and voices. A woman's pleasant tone, and then his heart nearly stopped. A young boy's voice, deeper than he remembered, but unmistakably Ethan's. His son was just outside, alive, within reach, but impossibly far away. The cabin door opened. A woman entered first, mid-40s, with graying hair and cold eyes that assessed the situation with practiced calm. She carried a large duffel bag that made ominous clinking sounds. Is he secure? She asked Mitchell, her voice businesslike. Tight as can be. Where's Owen? In the truck with his iPad. Told him we'd be a few minutes checking for mice. Rebecca set the bag down and unzipped it, revealing a folded blue tarp, bottles of chemicals, and other supplies. We should have done this years ago when he started asking questions about the other woman. Mark's blood ran cold. They'd done this before. Through the dirty window, he could see the truck parked outside, a small figure illuminated by the interior light. 8 years old now, focused on whatever was playing on his screen. Even from this distance, even with the dyed hair, Mark knew it was his son. Smart thinking with the iPad, Mitchell said. How long will that keep him occupied? Downloaded a new game before we left. Should give us at least an hour. Rebecca pulled on latex gloves with disturbing efficiency. Where are we taking him? There's an old mine shaft about 3 miles north. A 100-foot drop, floods in the spring. By the time anyone finds anything, there won't be much left. You killed others? Mark choked out. Rebecca laughed, a cold sound. Just one. A hiker who saw too much 5 years ago, who recognized Owen from an old missing poster at a gas station. Tom's not the only one who will protect our family. We're a team, Mitchell said, moving to help his wife prepare the tarp. Partners in everything. When I brought Ethan home that night, told her what happened, she didn't hesitate. Said we'd been given a gift, and we'd do whatever it took to keep him. Mark tested his bonds desperately. His son was just outside, playing a game, unaware that the people who had killed his mother were about to make him a complete orphan. Please, Mark tried. You have what you wanted. You have Ethan. Just let me go. I'll disappear, never contact you again. You already told the detective you were suspicious of Tom, Rebecca interrupted. No, Mr. Brennan, you should have left the past buried like your wife. A sound outside made them all freeze. Car doors slamming, multiple vehicles. Rebecca rushed to the window. Someone's coming. It looks like, her face paled. Police, multiple units. Mitchell grabbed his rifle from the cabinet. How did they find us? Through the window, Mark saw officers taking positions. His heart leaped, then plummeted as he saw Owen get out of the truck, confused by the sudden activity. The boy stood frozen between the cabin and the police cars, his iPad dropping from his hands. Owen! Rebecca shouted. Get back in the truck! But the boy just stood there, caught in the developing chaos as police loudspeakers crackled to life, and his parents prepared for a confrontation that would shatter his world completely. Tom Mitchell. This is the police. We have the cabin surrounded. Send out Mark Brennan and the boy, then exit with your hands visible. Detective Chen's voice boomed through a megaphone. How? Rebecca hissed, clutching the chemical bottles. We were careful. Mitchell peered through the window, rifle in hand. Brennan's phone. They must have tracked it here. Or his car at the house. Chen knew he suspected me. Mark felt a surge of hope. Chen had taken his concerns seriously after all. She had been monitoring him, and when he'd gone silent after Mitchell's visit, he'd acted. Mom, Dad. Owen's voice carried from outside, high and scared. What's happening? Get him back in the truck, Mitchell ordered. But Rebecca was already moving to the door. Owen, honey, get in the truck right now, she called out, trying to keep her voice calm. Lock the doors and stay down. Through the window, Mark could see his son's small figure running back to the vehicle, clearly terrified. Police officers held their positions, not wanting to traumatize the child further. We can still get out of this, Mitchell said, his ranger training taking over. The old logging road out back, if we can reach the truck with cops everywhere. Rebecca's composure was cracking. Tom, we're surrounded. Then we negotiate. We have Brennan as a hostage. Mark laughed bitterly from the floor. Negotiate? You murdered my wife. You kidnapped my son. You killed another hiker. What do you think you can negotiate? Shut up! Rebecca kicked him hard in the ribs. This is your fault. If you just left things alone. If I'd left my son with his mother's killers? Mark spat blood. Never. Mitchell was checking his ammunition, his movements quick and professional. They don't know about Stevens. That hiker's death was ruled an accident. If we can. The phone in Mitchell's pocket rang. He looked at the screen, Chen's number. Answer it, Rebecca urged. See what they want. Mitchell put it on speaker. Tom, this doesn't have to end badly. Chen's voice was calm but firm. Send out Mr. Brennan. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Mitchell replied. You've made assumptions based on the paranoid delusions of a grieving father. We have evidence, Tom. Sarah Brennan's jewelry with your fingerprints, not Morrison's. Security footage of you accessing that locker multiple times over the years. Your cabin rental records showing you were here, not at the shelters, the morning of July 15th, 6 years ago. Rebecca and Mitchell exchanged looks. Mark saw the moment they realized the walls were closing in. What do you want? Mitchell asked. Send out Brennan and the boy. Then you and Rebecca exit with hands visible. It's over, Tom. Don't make this worse. Worse? Mitchell laughed harshly. You want to take our son? He's not your son, Chen said firmly. He's Ethan Brennan, and he deserves to know the truth. Rebecca grabbed the phone. That boy doesn't even remember his birth parents. We're the only family he knows. You want to destroy his life. You destroyed his life when you murdered his mother, Chen responded. Rebecca, I know you're scared, but think about Owen, Ethan. Do you want his last memory of you to be a shootout? Let him remember the good times, not this. Mark watched Rebecca's face contort with rage and grief. For 6 years, she'd been living her dream. A happy family, a loving son. Now it was crumbling. There were no good times, Mark shouted toward the phone. Every birthday, every Christmas, every bedtime story was built on my wife's murder. You're not his parents. You're the monsters who killed his real mother. Mitchell raised the rifle toward Mark. One more word. An LED spotlight suddenly blazed through the window, blinding them. In that moment of disorientation, they heard the truck door opening outside. No! Rebecca screamed. Owen, stay in the truck! But through the chaos, Mark heard his son's voice closer now. Mom! Dad! I'm scared. The policeman said to come to him. Get back! Mitchell roared, spinning toward the door. Everything happened at once. Rebecca lunged for the door to get to Owen. Mitchell, blinded by the spotlight, swung his rifle wildly. Mark rolled hard to his left, using his bound body to trip Rebecca, who crashed into Mitchell. The rifle fired, the sound deafening in the small cabin. Wood splinters exploded from the doorframe. Outside, officers shouted commands, and Owen screamed, a sound that tore through Mark's heart. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" someone yelled outside. Mitchell struggled to regain his balance, but tear gas canisters crashed through the windows. Smoke filled the cabin instantly, choking and blinding. Mark squeezed his eyes shut, holding his breath, feeling Rebecca stumbling over him as she tried to reach the door. "Owen!" she screamed through the gas. "My baby!" Strong hands grabbed Mark, dragging him toward fresh air. He gasped as cool night air hit his lungs, blinking through tears to see tactical officers swarming the cabin. Mitchell and Rebecca were being forced to the ground, officers restraining them as they struggled and screamed for their son. "Ethan's safe," Chin said, appearing beside Mark as medics cut his restraints. "We got him to the ambulance. He's terrified but unharmed." Mark's arms screamed as circulation returned, but he forced himself upright. "I need to see him." He pushed past her, stumbling toward the ambulance where he could see a small figure wrapped in a blanket. His son sat on the ambulance bumper, a female officer kneeling beside him, speaking softly. The boy's face was streaked with tears, his whole body shaking. When he saw Mark approaching, he shrank back. "That's him," Owen whispered to the officer. "That's the man they had tied up. Is he a bad person?" Mark stopped a few feet away, his heart breaking. Behind him, he could hear Mitchell and Rebecca being read their rights, still shouting about their son, their family, their rights. But all Mark could see was the terrified 8-year-old, who didn't know him at all. "No, sweetheart," the officer told Owen gently. "He's not bad. In fact, he's been looking for you for a very long time." "Looking for me?" Confusion mixed with fear in those familiar eyes. "Why?" Mark knelt slowly, making himself smaller, non-threatening. "Because I love you," he said simply. "And I've missed you every single day." Ethan, stared at him, then looked back toward where his parents were being loaded into police cars. The boy's world was shattering, everything he'd believed ripping apart. Mark wanted nothing more than to gather him into his arms, but he stayed still, letting his son process this impossible moment. "They said you were bad," the boy whispered. "I know," Mark said gently. "They told you a lot of things that weren't true. And that's going to be really hard to understand, but I promise you will figure it out together when you're ready." The night was filled with sirens, radio chatter, and officers processing the scene. But in that moment, there was only Mark and his son, separated by 3 feet and 6 years of lies, beginning the long journey back to truth. The aftermath. "The Mitchells are being processed at county," Chin informed him. "Both are being charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy." Tom broke down completely during booking, but Rebecca's maintaining they did nothing wrong, that they saved Ethan from neglectful parents. "She's delusional," Mark said flatly. Chin consulted her notes. "Mitchell's confession matches what he told you at the cabin. He killed your wife at the shelter, but Rebecca was fully complicit from the moment he brought Ethan home. She helped dye his hair, created the adoption cover story, and kept him hidden. When that hiker recognized Ethan 5 years ago, Rebecca was the one who pushed him off the cliff while Tom created an alibi elsewhere. He went back 3 nights later during his regular patrol. He needed somewhere the body would never be found, or if found, wouldn't have usable evidence. He knew the hot springs would destroy DNA, fingerprints, everything. Morning Glory was perfect, deep, isolated. The mineral content would break down organic matter quickly. Mark felt sick, imagining Mitchell returning to move Sarah's body, calculating the best place to hide his crime, while Mark frantically searched for his family. "The forged adoption papers were Rebecca's work," Chin continued. "She had a cousin who worked in family services years ago and learned enough about the system to create believable documentation. They told neighbors they'd adopted through a private arrangement. After 1 year, when the searches died down and his hair had been thoroughly dyed, they started introducing Owen as their son. They planned all of it together," Mark said, feeling sick. "The really disturbing part is they seem to think they were good parents. Both keep insisting they gave Ethan a better life than he would have had. The psychological evaluations are going to be interesting. So what happens now?" "Supervised visits to start," Chin said. "Play therapy to help him process the truth at his pace. Eventually, if things progress well, gradual integration into your life. But, Mr. Brennan, you need to prepare yourself. He may never fully remember his early years with you and Sarah." Through the observation window, Mark could see his son with a social worker. Ethan sat hunched in a chair, arms wrapped around himself, looking utterly lost. The two people he'd trusted completely were in jail for murder. His entire world was a lie. "Can I see him?" Mark asked. The social worker, Dr. Martinez, hesitated briefly. "He's been asking about the Mitchells, wanting to know if they're okay. He's not ready to accept you as his father, but seeing you might help him understand you're not the enemy they painted you as." Mark entered the room slowly. Ethan looked up with those achingly familiar eyes, pressing closer to the social worker. "Hi," Mark said softly, sitting in a chair across from them. "I know you're scared and confused. I just wanted you to know that I've been looking for you for a very long time, and whenever you're ready, if you want to talk or ask questions, I'll be here." Ethan studied him for a long moment. "The policeman said you're my real dad." "Yes. And my mom and dad, they killed someone." The pain in his voice was devastating. "It's very complicated," Mark said carefully. "The doctors are going to help us understand everything together, okay? What matters right now is that you're safe." "But I love them," Ethan whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. "They read me stories and took me camping and made me pancakes on Saturdays. How can they be bad people if they loved me?" Mark nodded slightly, then turned to the social worker. It was a dismissal, but Mark would take what he could get. His son was alive, traumatized, confused, but alive. Everything else could be worked through with time. As he left the room, Mark thought about Sarah, how she would have handled this with so much more grace, so much more wisdom. But she wasn't here, murdered by a desperate man who'd stolen their son. "He'll need you to be patient," Dr. Martinez said quietly beside him. "To let him grieve the only life he's known, even as you're grieving the years you lost. It's not the reunion you dreamed of, but it's a beginning." Mark nodded, watching through the window as his son, Ethan, no matter what name he answered to, slowly began to process his shattered world. It would be a long journey back to each other. But after 6 years of emptiness, Mark finally had hope.